Benevolence, dear immortals. Welcome to my channel. I am Whimsical William. Let's get into it. Alright, we got another video because I've been reading so much manga lately. This video is going to be about the manga adaptation of No Longer Human. It's based off of a novel that's loosely based off of a true story. Some events are a little exaggerated while others actually happened. It's a very tragic, very sad story, and I'm glad that it's been told so many different times in so many different ways. In this video, we are going to compare Junji Ito's version versus Osamu Furuya. Hopefully I pronounced that somewhat correctly. I will say, full disclosure, that comparing these two different versions and just talking about the story, this is going to be the definitive version. In my humble opinion, the art is better, the storytelling is better, the story itself is better. Everything about this manga is better than Junji Ito's version. The only thing that is better about the Junji Ito version is the fact that it is a hardcover and it's just presented a lot nicer. It's a Viz Media and this is a vertical title. It's just a paperback. They're roughly about the same size. Pretty thick books. They cover about 3 volumes of material. Let's compare the art real quick. Now, even though these two stories are based off of the same novel, they are told and viewed in such vastly different ways. Junji Ito's version is around the same time period, 1940s, 1930s, around that time, while Osamu's version is a little bit more modern, and there are a few changes in the storyline that kind of make it a little bit smoother. But if we get into the meat and potatoes of the whole aspect of this video, comparing these two different mangas, what makes this manga better, in my opinion, besides the objective things like the art, character design, just the flow of the story, is really how well each incident and each part of the main character's life flows into the next. Junji Ito is known for horror, but he almost exclusively does anthologies or episodic style writing, where it'll be a short story and then it'll be something else and something else and something else, and eventually the entire story will come around. As in, this is just one big story of this person's life. It's just a lot more linear, and for the way that his life worked and how it happened, from his childhood to his death, it really needed to be told in a more linear fashion, and this story delivered. Also, Junji Ito's habit of bringing shock and horror while also adding a taste of comedy made each tragedy less tragic. But the tragedies that happened in this story, the decline of the main character's mental health, the horrible things that he thought about himself, and the horrible things that other people thought about him, everything just hit harder. If you are not an adult, don't read either one of these because there's nudity in here. There's a lot of trigger warnings. There's a lot of bad things in these stories. But they're written so well that I highly recommend that if you are an adult, you check it out, and just be aware of the trigger warnings. Trigger warnings are they're pretty bad, so enter at your own risk. But the story is like a warning. It's like if you notice that your mental health is declining, don't run to drugs, don't run to alcohol, don't use people, don't use women, don't use men, don't isolate. Like, try to figure out what it is that's triggering you and that's bothering you. And if it's something that's an outside source or an outside issue, or if it's something within. Is it trauma from childhood that has caused you to become the type of person you are? Or is it something outside of you that keeps happening to you and you just need to get away from it? Like, you got like a horrible family and they treat you very poorly, so it's affecting your mental health and making you feel less of a person, versus you had horrible things happen to you in your childhood and it manifests in ways that you don't realize, but other people have pointed out to you. That's something, all of it is something to go to therapy for, and something to dig deeper into and to try to figure out. But one, you can do a little more do it yourself, versus the other, you're just gonna need help. And like, it's hard to admit when you need help. And both of these stories, I keep holding this one because I like it so much more. Both of these stories, our main character knows that they need help, but their guilt destroys them and makes them feel like they don't deserve the option to have help. And the times also make it different. In the 1940s, 1930s, your mental health was just inject this into yourself, take some medicine, go out in the countryside, figure it out. There was a lot less support. And the more modern, version of the story, there was a lot more support. But what really made it harder for our main character to get help was the fact that he had no money, so he was disowned from his family, and there was no benefits at his job because he became a manga artist. You don't get benefits for being a manga artist. You draw and you draw and you draw until you can't anymore. That's just how you're gonna live. Being a manga artist in Japan is kind of tough, especially in those older times. Even though the other manga is more modern than the Junji Ito version, it's still not 2012, 2020. It's 19, I think 60 or 70 or something like that. I don't remember the exact years, but it was old enough to where mental health wasn't really taken seriously. So in the more modern version of the story, he runs to drugs, and there's a drug dealer that's like, I can help you, I could take away your pain. He's a guy. And he's like, wow, I can make my manga, I could be a better husband, I could do everything. And as soon as the high wore off, he was depressed, lashing out, angry, saying horrible things to his wife. And in order for him to function as a decent human being, he needed the drugs. In Junji Ito's version, this is towards the end of the story, by the way. I don't want to give too many spoilers, but I feel like the shock value of the horrible events that happened in this story will take your attention away from the ending parts of the story. So I think you'll be fine hearing these parts. But anyway, in Junji Ito's version, he's doing drugs because a lady at a pharmacy tells him he needs to stop drinking. And he's like, well, I can't function without alcohol. I can't, draw manga and just function, period. So she's like, here, inject this into yourself whenever you really, really feel like you need alcohol. And her mistake was the fact that this guy is an alcoholic, so he just always needs it. So at first he's like, wow, this is better than alcohol. This is great. He injects himself, and he's only supposed to take like one a day or one every couple of days. That one a day quickly turns into 4 a day, 4 injections a day. He runs out of medicine, and he keeps going back and back and back. And in this story, he cheats on his wife with the person given the medicine. And it was so silly, the wife's reaction, and also how easy it was for him to have an affair with this other person, that what he did was obviously wrong, but there wasn't a lot of impact because it just wasn't believable the way that it was set up and it was written. Um, in the situation in the other book, he didn't cheat, but he treated her so bad that cheating probably would have been a lesser offense. And instead of getting free medicine, he had to pay for the drugs and he ran out of money. He was really exhibiting the behavioral patterns of a person that is strung out on drugs and who's desperate, and their physical health and mental health are declining both at the same time. So it was really tragic to see him fall apart, see his hair turn gray really fast, him aging rapidly, and the art being a little bit more detailed. You get to see his physical decline almost in real time. It just felt like that because the art was so detailed and realistic. So there's like a lot of little subtle changes in the story. His best friend or his rival in the story is he just seems like a more kinder and more realistic version. The other story versus Junji Ito's, and Junji Ito's a guy's kind of like a scumbag, but he's like, I mean, I'll care if it's for my benefit, and he didn't really seem like he could ever be a friend to him. So my main takeaway with both of these stories, they're absolutely incredible. Definitely a psychological horror with a few horror elements because of his delusions and his mental health declining, making him see visions and ghosts and things of that nature. It looked very dark, but most of it was a mental thing. Like everything around him was just normal, but tragedy was happening around him because he was just becoming such a bad person, and he would suck in people with his charm and his good looks, and he would be their demise, mostly women. He didn't want to take advantage of women, but it was so easy that he just started to do it because it was just the only way that he could really survive. He would just live off of women, and then when he was done with them, he'd find the next one. So that was vile and horrible. But he'd fall in love sometimes, and it was almost like karma, if you believe in such a thing. When you fall in love, tragedy will happen. Like, you're just not meant to be with anyone and be happy because you caused so much unhappiness. So it's a very hard, difficult story to read, but I found myself struggling to get through Junji Ito's version. Like, it took me almost twice as long to finish that manga versus this one. This one I just sped right through. I had a great time reading this. I couldn't really put it down. So in my humble opinion, if you're gonna pick up this story and you only want one, you can skip out on Junji Ito unless you're a Junji Ito collector like myself. I like to try to get as many Junji Itos as I can. Comparing these two, Junji Ito doesn't hold a candle. In the art, the story, any of it. Only the fact that it's a hardcover. If you're into hardcovers, I understand that. I am too. So yeah, if you got this far into the video, I don't want to give out too many spoilers, but I really want to tell you guys about this story. It's insane. I can't tell you too much of it because there's just so many trigger warnings, and I haven't quite decided how I want to move around that aspect in that story while keeping this channel PG. So I will say once again, if you are not an adult, don't read this. If you are sensitive to anything, really, I wouldn't recommend reading this. Like if sexual assault, death, just sorrow, if you're sensitive to those topics, I completely understand those are difficult subjects. Please don't read this story. But if you feel mentally prepared and ready, and you've suffered through Goodnight Punpun, Berserk, and a few other super dark series, then you'll be fine. You can get through this. As far as a dark story, this is probably one of my favorites because it's closest to realism, which makes it even scarier. Like, this person lived this horrible life. When he was a child, it starts off when he's a kid, like in elementary school. He was a prankster that called himself clowning, but really he was afraid of people and he hated people. He hated his family and he really didn't want to be around people, but he felt like if he could put this mask on and make them feel welcome and make them feel safe, that in turn it could help him feel safe. But it didn't really work. This story starts to differ a lot from the two different versions. Junji Ito's version, his childhood just lasts longer. And it's kind of boring. I'm not gonna lie. That was like the first red flag for me in comparing these two. I'm like, all right, like his childhood it's eventful, but not the way that it's being told. You know, like this guy, he doesn't like his dad. He doesn't like his family. All the women in his family are like really, really flirtatious, and it's just gross because he's a kid, and a lot of them are grown, or a lot of them are like older. So it was gross, but it wasn't gross for any benefit of the story. It was just, oh, this is unnecessary and gross. It's just here. Whereas the other story, it just showed him learning how to manipulate at a young age. He's like, I could make these people laugh, and I could make them like me, and I could get stuff from them. So he was learning manipulation tactics, and honestly, the true definition of narcissism, because a lot of people use that word loosely and incorrectly, or that term rather. But in this other version of the story, he's truly a narcissist, especially growing up. And he learns how to have empathy and sympathy for others, but survival doesn't allow him to really lean into those emotions and ways of living. So he often reverts back to using people and manipulating people. He's not a good person. And you could tell deep down he'd like to be, but he just doesn't have the support, or he's gone too far and he can't access those deeper emotions to channel those better ways of living. For him, it's too late. Obviously, you're never too late to change, but some people can be so far gone that they can't see the light that other people can see in them, which is super sad. And I see it all the time. And it makes this story scary because it could be me, it could be you, where we convince ourselves that we can't do something and we can't be a better person when we can, and we've given up on ourselves. And once you give up on yourself, there's nothing anyone else can do to pull you out of that. You have to start with yourself by pulling yourself out of those dark places. And you're your biggest enemy. And you know, if you don't believe in yourself, like I said, it's a wrap, it's over. And that's where he was in his life from almost the very beginning. Like, he was set on this path. And the more people that got hurt when he tried to be a better person, the farther he would sink into guilt. He manipulated a lot of people, but he also really tried to fall in love and to have love. And sometimes he didn't ruin it, and sometimes it was circumstances around him that ruined it. And him not being emotionally secure and emotionally mature, wasn't able to salvage and work through these horrible situations to find his footing, to get back on the track to being the best version of himself. And the more guilt, he collected guilt like Pokemon cards. He collected guilt like collecting comic books or manga. And it just grew and grew and grew until it weighed him down so much that he couldn't access reality anymore. Like, he was seeing more visions than seeing things that were actually in front of him. And his health declined so far that mentally, his mental health was so bad that it made him physically sick. And then the alcohol, the opium, the drugs, it was bad. It's a really bad story, and it's really sad. And I want you to read it if you can stomach it. It's really good. One more time before I end this video. If your brain is like mine and you like to compare these stories, I recommend you read Junji Ito's version first. There's another version out, but I haven't checked it out. I've only checked these two out. Read this one first. I think it's not as good. And then read this one second. This one's a masterpiece. Out of 10, I give it a 9. I give this one a 6. Because it starts off strong, and like the story, it just loses itself. And it kind of loses its purpose. Like, this one teaches you something at the end. And this one, it just ends. It's like, oh. Like, this one is like, check on your loved ones. Focus on your mental health. And take care of yourself. This one has so many good messages in it. Don't take advantage of good people. Let people care about you. Don't rely on outside sources like drugs and violence to fill the hole in your heart. Fill the hole in your heart with good people that care about you. Fill the hole in your heart with art. Really fall into art, really fall into passions, really fall into things that won't hurt you. Art's never gonna hurt you. Music's never gonna hurt you. You can get hurt indirectly, but not directly by it. You know, you just gotta really surround yourself by good people. If you're trying not to drink because you know that it turns you into a person that you're not, and you have a friend that's constantly saying, have a drink, have a drink. What's one drink gonna do? That's not a good person. That's not somebody that you should be around. That's not somebody who cares about your well-being. Surround yourself around people that are like, oh, you're not gonna drink anymore? All right, that's awesome. We could figure out, something else to do when we hang out. We could go go-kart racing. We could draw. We go to a concert, here, take some water. Not somebody who's gonna disrespect your boundaries and peer pressure you into something that you're not comfortable with. So thank you so much for tuning into another video. That was a long rant. I'm sorry that I couldn't give you the full story. I really wanted to, but as I was thinking about this video, I realized that there were so many dark, horrible things that happened in this story that I personally wouldn't feel comfortable sharing it. I mean, I don't mind sharing it, but I just don't have a concrete way to make it friendly, to make it, all right, this is bad, but it's not gonna ruin anyone's day by listening to me talk about it. Because it's dark. It's probably one of the darkest mangas that I've read. Not Junji Ito's version, his is more comical. It's still dark and twisted. And there's nudity in it too, so, if you're not a fan of that, be prepared to see that. A lot of dark subject matter, a lot of nudity, a lot of truth, a lot of hurt, a lot of sorrow. So if you're not in the right headspace, do not read this. Read something cute, read something adorable, read something hopeful, because there's no hope in either one of those stories. It's being told from the perspective of a person who's given up. If you feel like giving up, don't give up. Keep pushing forward. Life is tiring, but life is life. You're alive. And things that are alive move, so move forward. Like my favorite character, The Flash, always says, keep moving forward. Peace.